My name is Owen Garrett. I'm 34 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I worked for a financial consulting firm in Charlotte. Lived in an apartment on the 14th floor with a view of the skyline and no plants, because I traveled too much to keep anything alive and had not spoken to my grandfather in 11 years. I want to be honest about that part. 11 years. Not because of a fight or a falling out or any particular moment I could point to and say that's when it happened. Just the slow, unremarkable accumulation of distance that happens when two people occupy completely different orbits and neither one makes a sustained effort to close the gap. He was in Mill Haven, Tennessee, population 3,000 and change, running a diner he'd owned for 31 years. I was everywhere else, in the specific way that people in my line of work are everywhere else. Airports and conference rooms and hotel gyms and the 14th floor of an apartment building with no plants. He died on a Tuesday in April. My mother called me from her car outside the hospital, and I sat in the airport in Denver waiting for a connection and tried to feel the shape of it. An 11-year absence is a particular kind of grief. It's not the clean grief of someone you've been close to. It's complicated by the awareness of everything that didn't happen, all the conversations that didn't occur, all the Christmases and phone calls and Sunday afternoons that went by, without either of us reaching across them. The lawyer called the following week. Harold Garrett, my grandfather, whom I had not called Granddad since I was roughly 17 years old, whose voice on the phone I probably wouldn't have recognized, had left me everything. The house, some savings, and the diner. Garrett's. Established 1989. Mill Haven, Tennessee. I drove down on a Saturday morning with a single bag, the intention of settling the estate as efficiently as possible, and the plan to put the diner on the market within the month. I had no emotional attachment to a restaurant in a small Tennessee town. I barely had an emotional attachment to the man who'd owned it. There was nothing sentimental in my plan, just practical. Inventory the assets, engage a realtor, sign what needed signing, and get back to Charlotte. The plan lasted until I opened the front door of Garrett's at 9 in the morning and found it full of customers. Full is relative, for a diner that seats 32. But 11 of those seats were occupied when I walked in, by a cross-section of Mill Haven that included two elderly men arguing pleasantly about something involving local zoning regulations, a woman in nursing scrubs eating eggs before what I assumed was the start of a shift, 3 teenagers who were ostensibly doing homework and actually doing something else on their phones, and several others in various states of coffee drinking and conversation. Behind the counter, a woman with white hair pulled back from a strong face was moving with the unhurried efficiency of someone who has run a breakfast service so many times that every movement has been refined to its essential version. She had a coffee pot in one hand and was writing something on a notepad with the other in what appeared to be a physical impossibility, but was clearly just practice. She looked up when I came in. Her eyes found me the way eyes find someone they've been expecting. "Owen," she said, not a question. "You know who I am," I said. "You look like Harold did at your age," she said. "Sit down, I'll get you coffee." "I'm not here to—" "I know why you're here," she said. "Sit down anyway. We'll get to that." There was something in her voice that was not unkind, and also was not optional. I sat down at the counter. Her name was Ruth Calloway. She'd been working at Garrett's for 22 years, she told me, while she poured coffee and delivered plates with the reflexive competence of long practice. She'd started the year after her husband died, when her daughter Nora was 9 and she needed work that fit around school hours. Harold had hired her without an interview. He'd said, she told me, that he could train anyone to carry plates, but he couldn't train someone to care about the people they were carrying them for, and she clearly cared about people. He was right, she said simply, about most things. I looked around the diner, at the regulars who were clearly regulars, the ease with which they occupied their seats, the shorthand with the waitstaff, the lack of any menu consultation, at the walls, which were covered in the accumulated evidence of 3 decades, photographs, a few mounted fish that someone clearly thought were funny, a community bulletin board bristling with flyers and business cards, a child's drawing framed and hung next to the window that said, "Garrett's is my favorite," in careful crayon letters. "I need to talk to you about the diner," I said. "I know," Ruth said. She refilled a coffee cup at the far end of the counter without appearing to pay attention to anything other than me. "What do you want to do with it?" "Sell it," I said. "I don't know anything about running a diner. I live in Charlotte. My career is in finance. There's no version of this where I keep it." Ruth looked at me steadily. "Your grandfather thought there might be." "My grandfather didn't know me," I said, and heard how it sounded when it came out, and felt the specific weight of it land. Ruth nodded slowly, not agreeing with me, acknowledging that I'd said something true that wasn't the whole truth. "He knew more than you think," she said, and she went to take an order from the teenagers, who had apparently decided homework was finished, leaving me with my coffee and the flyers on the bulletin board, and a drawing in crayon that some child had made decades ago, and Harold had chosen to frame and hang in the window. She told me the rest of it in pieces, over the course of that morning, between customers and refills and the controlled chaos of the 11 o'clock rush that I had not anticipated, and which turned out to be real. Millhaven was small, but the diner served as something like the town's living room, and the 11 o'clock rush on a Saturday was apparently a standing institution. I watched Ruth work. There's a specific quality to competence that's been refined over decades. It doesn't look like effort. It doesn't look like skill. It just looks like the natural order of things, the way water flows downhill. Ruth moved through the diner that way. She knew every person by name. She knew what they were going to order before they said it. She knew when someone needed the check and when they needed 5 more minutes, and the difference between the two was something she read in the set of their shoulders or the way they held their coffee cup. In the brief moments between orders, she talked to me the way people talk when they've been carrying something and have finally found the right person to carry it to. Harold had asked her to stay on after he died. He'd asked months before, when the doctor had given him an honest assessment, and he'd decided to make his arrangements carefully. He'd said his grandson would come eventually, and that when he did, he wouldn't be ready, and that someone who knew the place needed to be there until he got ready. "He was certain you'd come," she said. "I came to close it," I said. "I know," she said. "He thought that too, at first." I looked at her. "He said you'd come to close it and you'd stay to figure out what to do with it," she said. "He said you were the kind of person who needed to touch a thing before you understood what it was." "He said that about me," I said. "Someone he hadn't spoken to in 11 years. "He spoke about you," she said. "That's different from speaking to you." I sat with that for a moment. "How often?" I said. She looked at me with those steady eyes. "Every day," she said. "One way or another, every day." She said it simply, without drama, the way you say things that are simply true. And I sat at Harold Garrett's counter in the middle of his Saturday morning rush and thought about 11 years of every day, and what that meant, and what I'd been doing with those same 11 years on my end. The lawyer had mentioned a back office, a small room behind the kitchen that Harold had used for paperwork and, apparently, for other things. Ruth showed me to it after the rush thinned out, opening the door with the manner of someone who has been waiting to do this for a while and has thought about how to do it. It was a small room, a desk with a lamp, filing cabinets, a shelf of binders containing what I assumed was the accumulated administrative record of 31 years of diner operation, and on the wall, covering most of the space above the desk, a collection of items that stopped me in the doorway. Newspaper clippings, photographs, a graduation announcement from a college I'd attended, a small item from a Charlotte business publication about a deal I'd worked on 3 years ago, the kind of thing that runs 2 paragraphs and which I hadn't thought twice about at the time, a photograph from a company website, The kind of headshot that gets taken at onboarding and which I'd forgotten existed. A postcard I'd sent my mother from Tokyo 7 years ago that she must have mentioned to him, or perhaps shown him. He'd been collecting evidence of my life for a long time. I stood in the doorway of that small room and looked at the wall and tried to locate what I was feeling inside a vocabulary that had not prepared me for this particular thing. Grief, yes, but also something else, something that didn't have a clean name. I crossed to the desk and sat down in the chair that had been his chair, in the room where he'd apparently spent part of every day for years, surrounded by the evidence of a grandson he'd watched from a distance because he didn't know how to close it any other way. There was a photo on the desk, not framed, just sitting there, slightly curled at the corner from being handled. Me at maybe 8 years old, at some family gathering I couldn't specifically remember, holding a fishing rod and squinting into the sun. On the back, in handwriting I recognized from the single birthday card he'd sent when I was 12. "That's my boy. He doesn't know it yet." I sat in Harold Garrett's chair for a long time. Ruth found me there an hour later and didn't say anything about it. She set a cup of coffee on the desk and sat in the only other chair, the small wooden one beside the filing cabinet, and waited. "Why didn't he call?" I said. "If he thought about me every day, if he was collecting all of this, why didn't he just call?" Ruth was quiet for a moment. "I asked him that," she said. "Once, about 5 years ago." She looked at the wall. "He said he'd picked up the phone 100 times. He said he always put it back down because he didn't know how to start the conversation after so much silence. He said the longer the silence went, the harder the call got, and he kept waiting until he knew what to say, and he never quite figured it out." I thought about how many times I might have picked up a phone, how many times I'd thought I should call him, and let the thought go by without acting on it. "He could have written," I said. "He wrote," she said. "He just didn't send them." She went to the filing cabinet, opened the second drawer, and took out a manila envelope that had been sitting in the front of the drawer, clearly placed there deliberately. She set it on the desk. The envelope had my name on it, in his handwriting. "He put that there in January," she said. "He said if anything happened before he figured out what to say out loud, at least there'd be the letters." I looked at the envelope, at my name in handwriting I'd seen twice in my life. I didn't open it right away. I wasn't ready. Ruth seemed to understand this without being told, because she stood up, said the lunch setup needed doing, and left me alone with the envelope and the wall and the photograph with its message on the back. The diner had a daughter. I don't mean literally. I mean that Nora Calloway had grown up inside Garrett's, the way some children grow up inside a church or a family business. Not working there exactly, but present in the way that children are present in places where their parents spend their days. She'd done homework at the corner table for years. She'd known Harold since she was 9 years old, and had apparently regarded him with the affection of someone who has been given something she didn't quite have at home: a steady presence, a reliable warmth, a person who asked her questions and listened to the answers. She appeared at the diner on Sunday morning, the day after I'd arrived, and I recognized her before Ruth introduced us, because she walked through the door like someone walking into their own kitchen. She was my age approximately, with her mother's directness and her own version of it, less careful, more immediate. She looked at me the way people look at someone they already have strong opinions about and are revising in real time. "You're Owen," she said. "You're Nora," I said. "Mom called me last night," she said, sitting down at the counter without being invited. "She said you came to close the place." "That's what I planned," I said. "What do you plan now?" she said. "I don't know," I said honestly. She picked up the menu, looked at it, set it down. She'd clearly never needed it. "Harold used to talk about you," she said. "When I was a kid, and even after. He kept a copy of your college graduation announcement in his wallet for about 6 years. I know because it fell out once when he was paying for something and he picked it up very carefully and put it back like it was important. I didn't send him that announcement, I said. I know, she said. Your mother did. He called her every Christmas. She called him every Easter. They kept the connection going even when you didn't. She said it without accusation, just the fact of it. He understood. He said you got your stubbornness from him and that was fair. I looked at the counter, at the coffee mug Ruth had put in front of me without asking, the way she did everything. Did you like him? I said. Nora looked at me. I loved him, she said simply. He taught me to make pie crust when I was 11. He came to my high school graduation when my own father didn't. He told me I was capable of more than I was attempting for most of my 20s, and he was right. She paused. He was the kind of man who paid full attention to whoever was in front of him. Not a lot of people do that. I thought about the wall in the back office, about the newspaper clippings and the headshot and the postcard. He paid attention to people who weren't in front of him too, I said. He did, she said, in whatever way he could manage. I opened the envelope that evening, sitting at a table in the closed diner with the chairs up on the other tables around me, and the particular stillness of a restaurant after hours, which is its own specific kind of quiet, a place built for noise and company, temporarily empty, the echo of the day still in it. The coffee machine ticked as it cooled. Somewhere outside, a car went by on Main Street. The community bulletin board caught a draft from somewhere and rustled slightly. There were 6 letters. The oldest was dated 9 years ago. The most recent was from February, 2 months before he died. He'd written them the way people write things they're not sure they'll ever send. Directly, without the careful performance of a letter you know will be read. He wrote about Millhaven, about the diner, about regulars who'd become something close to family. He wrote about the Hendersons, who'd been coming in every Tuesday for 20 years, and whose order he knew better than they did. About a woman named May, who used to cry quietly in the corner booth every December, and who eventually, after 3 Decembers of him leaving her coffee without being asked, had told him why. About how a place where people ate became, without anyone planning it, a place where people also talked, and how the talking was sometimes the more important part. He wrote about my mother, whom he clearly spoke to more than I'd known, and whom he clearly loved in the particular way of people who are connected through someone else and discover they have their own connection independent of it. He'd been worried about her. He'd sent her money twice without telling her where it came from, which she'd apparently accepted without asking, which told me something about both of them. He wrote about me, about reading the business article 3 years ago and feeling something he described as recognition, not pride exactly, but the specific pleasure of seeing someone become a version of themselves that you'd somehow known was coming. About the headshot on the company website he'd found and printed, about the way he'd thought I had his hands, or rather his father's hands, and how strange it was that genetics moved through people like that, carrying things forward without anyone deciding to. And in the last letter, from February, I don't know if you'll come when I'm gone. I suspect you will, because you're the kind of person who does the hard things eventually. You just take the long way around them. I did too. It's not a criticism. It's a recognition. What I want you to know, if I can't find a way to say it before then, is that you are never not thought about. Every day, one way or another. I kept the distance because I didn't know how to close it, and I kept meaning to figure it out, and I am sorry I ran out of time before I did. The diner is yours, not because I want you to run it. You probably won't, and that's all right. But because I want you to come there and see what it is, and know that it was built with you in mind as part of whatever came next. You were always part of whatever came next, even when neither of us knew how to say so. Take care of Ruth. She'll take care of everything else. I sat in the empty diner for a long time after I finished reading, long enough that the coffee machine stopped ticking and the Main Street traffic went quiet and the stillness got complete. I sat with the letters spread on the table and Harold Garrett's handwriting in front of me and tried to figure out what to do with the specific grief of being loved carefully by someone you never quite let love you. Outside, Millhaven went on doing what it did. Inside, the chairs were still on the tables, and the lights were on low, and Harold Garrett's diner was around me, which he had built, and which he had left me, and which I had come to close, and which I was beginning to understand I was not going to close. I called my supervisor in Charlotte on Monday morning, told her I was taking an extended leave of absence. She asked how long. I said I didn't know yet. She said she'd hold the position for 3 months, and after that we'd need to discuss it. I said that was fair. She asked if I was all right. I said I was working on it, which was the most honest answer I had. Ruth arrived at the diner at 6:15, which was apparently her normal time, and found me already there with coffee made, and the letters back in the envelope in the back office, and a legal pad on the counter with the beginning of what I was slowly understanding needed to be understood before anything else could happen. She looked at the legal pad, at me, at the coffee. "You stayed," she said. "For now," I said. "How long's for now?" "Long enough to figure out what I'm doing," I said. She poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter and looked at me the way she'd looked at me since I walked in on Saturday, steadily, without pressure. "He would have liked this," she said, "you being here." "He should have called," I said. For the last time, I thought. I'd said it 3 times now, and each time it landed differently, and this time it landed somewhere that felt like it had found its final resting place. But he didn't, and I didn't, and we're both out of time to do it right. I looked at the counter. "So I'm doing the next thing." "What's the next thing?" she said. "Learning what I don't know," I said, "starting with how to run a breakfast service." Ruth's expression did something complicated, not quite a smile, something older and more specific than a smile. "The coffee's already made," she said. "That's the hardest part. Come around this side of the counter." Nora came in at 7:15 on her way to work, for what I gathered was a habitual coffee stop that had been her routine for years. She looked at me behind the counter and stopped. "You're still here," she said. "Still here," I said. "You're behind the counter." "Ruth is teaching me the breakfast service," I said. Nora looked at her mother. Ruth poured coffee without comment. Nora sat down at the counter and looked at me the way she'd looked at me since she'd walked in the day before, revising her assessment in real time. "Can I give you some advice?" she said. "You're going to anyway," I said. Something moved across her face. "The eggs," she said. "Everyone wants the eggs a specific way. You need to ask every time, even the regulars, because they'll tell you they want the same thing, but sometimes they don't. And if you don't ask, they'll accept what they get instead of saying something. And then they'll go home feeling like they didn't quite get what they came for." She picked up her coffee. "That's true about the eggs. It's also true about most things." I looked at her. "Harold said that," she said. "About the eggs. I've been thinking about it for years." Ruth came out of the kitchen with a plate for a customer at the far end and passed behind me and said, without looking up, "She's right about the eggs." The morning rush started at 7:45. It was not the controlled chaos of Saturday. It was a weekday rhythm, more consistent, more purposeful. People coming in with a place to be next, eating with the specific efficiency of people who have built their mornings around this stop. Ruth moved through it with the ease of 22 years. I moved through it with a legal pad of notes and the willingness of someone who understands that the only way forward is through the part where you don't know what you're doing yet. Nora stayed longer than she'd planned to, and left at 8:30 with a look at the door that said she'd be back, which she was, at lunch, and again at 5:30 when the dinner prep was starting, and I was approximately 40% less lost than I'd been 12 hours earlier. 3 months later, the financial consulting firm in Charlotte filled my position. I wasn't there to notice. I was behind the counter at Garrett's, where I'd learned that the Hendersons take their coffee black and their eggs over easy, that Table 4 is where the book club meets on Wednesdays, that the community bulletin board needs to be curated weekly, or it goes feral, and that Ruth Calloway has been right about every single thing she has told me since I walked through the door. And Nora, who knows this place the way she knows her own name, who grew up inside it and carries it the way you carry things that have made you, comes in every morning at 7:15 and every evening at 5:30, and has been showing me, slowly and without making a production of it, everything Harold thought I'd eventually be ready to see. I found one more note, not in the office, not in an envelope, in the pages of the worn recipe notebook that lived on the shelf above the stove, the one with 31 years of Harold's handwriting in it, recording adjustments to the pie crust and the gravy, and the dozen other things that got refined over decades of doing them. Near the back, tucked between a page about biscuit ratios and a note about the particular brand of vanilla that was worth the extra cost, a single index card. If you're reading this, you stayed long enough to find it. That means you're ready. I always knew you would be. Take care of the place. Take care of Ruth. Let Nora show you things. She knows more than she thinks she does, and you'll be better for knowing her. I'm sorry about the 11 years. I'm glad about what comes next. Love, Granddad. I stood in the kitchen of Garrett's with a recipe notebook in my hands and an index card I hadn't been looking for, and I thought about the long way around, about how it sometimes takes a person exactly the time it takes, about the difference between arriving late and not arriving at all. I was late. I was there. That turned out to be enough.